Hello everyone and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. We begin today out at the North Range, where OSU researchers are looking at cow efficiency. There's some interesting research underway on cattle at OSU. Joining us now is our Extension Beef Cattle Specialist, Dave Lalman. And Dave, let's kind of have an overview of what you guys have been looking at recently.
One of the major research emphases we've had here at the North Range unit is cow efficiency. And normally you define efficiency as some measure of input divided by some measure of output. And if you're a commercial cow-calf producer that weans his calves, say in the fall of the year for a spring calving herd, and markets them at that time, your production measure of output is calf weaning weight. Most people can collect that information, whether it's the group weight across the scales at the market or individual weights on the ranch. The difficulty is getting the input side of the efficiency equation with forage intake. If we use just annual forage intake as the measure of input, that's a challenge. So that's kind of what we've been working on.
And then how did you set that up to sort of control those forage intake conditions? It takes a little planning.
It's difficult, and that's why there's no information on cows available really in cow efficiency. There are some other universities and Oklahoma State working on that question now, but it's surprisingly, it just hasn't been researched to a great extent because of the difficulty of measuring forage intake. What we have done here is just we have chosen to measure it directly. So the graduate students come out and they weigh the amount of hay fed to a cow in the morning with an electronic scale. Daylight the next day, then they come back to that feeder with cows in an individual pen, and then they clean the hay up, put it in a big tub or trash can, and weigh it back on the same electronic scale. And the difference between what they fed and what's left over, of course, is intake for that day. And so we measure intake for about a week period of time, and so we get the average intake over that week's period. And then we do that, the weekly measure or the week-long measure of intake, a number of times throughout the year to reflect their changing production situation, whether they're gestating or early lactation or late lactation. And then we can estimate annual forage intake.
Okay. You have a couple of cow-calf pairs that you've pulled aside to kind of show us sort of the results and your findings. Let's talk about this first pair and this cow that we see here and sort of what you found with her.
Absolutely. Linda, we picked out two cow-calf pairs for our demonstration here today just to show the variation in forage intake and the measure we're calling cow efficiency. And this is the first cow of the pair. This is number 709. She has never missed a calf up to this point in her productive career, so she's a very fertile cow. On average, so far, her calves have weighed 573 pounds at weaning. So she's a very productive cow, does a great job. She weighs 1,424 pounds, okay? So she's a pretty good sized cow. On average, her forage consumption has been at the higher end of the group of cows that we've been measuring, okay? And so on an annual basis, her forage consumption in 2011, we estimated at 10,978 pounds. Okay, now if you divide that by 365, that's about 30.1 pounds of forage per day.
Okay, let's go take a look at the other cow-calf pair that you have for us. Dave, let's talk about some of the obvious physical differences that we see with this cow.
This is a little smaller cow. First of all, her number is 424, and she's also been a very productive cow, just like 709. She's never missed a calf, and she always weans a good-sized calf. Now, physically, yes, she is 120 pounds lighter than the 709 cow. But on average, she has weaned a calf that's weighed 558 pounds through her lifetime. And her annual forage intake is 8,789 pounds, or that's what we have estimated last year. So if you divide that by 365, you should come up with about 24 1/10 pound of forage intake on a daily basis.
Okay. So when you compare the two cows, what does this mean?
Well, if we go back to our efficiency equation, the output, we're going to use the calf weaning weight as the output. And one was 573, the other was 558. So they're both very productive cows. In fact, the 709 cow has a weaning weight ratio of 112, and 424 has a weaning ratio of 111, which just means they wean calves 12 or 11% above the herd average. So they're very productive cows. But then if we look at the input side of the equation, there's obviously some big differences. And the smaller cow, 424, consumes over a ton of forage less in a year. And she does that and still produces a calf that's very comparable to 709. So those are extreme differences. It's one cow's at the lower end of efficiency and the other is at the higher end. But if you think about the value of that over 2,000 pounds difference in forage intake, last year during the drought it might have cost $125 to almost $200 to purchase that extra ton of forage. And then you've got 15 pounds of additional calf weaning weight to pay for it. And that's probably only worth somewhere between $12 and $20. So it's a big difference.
It is a big difference. Does genetics play in at all on how much they consume?
Well, it certainly could, absolutely. You'd expect, the bigger cows would consume more forage, and the 709 cow is a bigger cow. You might expect that there would be some within, say, sire line differences and certainly some breed differences. We'll account for those differences at the end of the experiment when we have all the data gathered and try to take some of those factors out of the equation. But what we're trying to get to is, how much variation is there in true efficiency? And can we find a way to identify those animals that are more efficient, consume less forage, but wean big calves still? And then once we identify a way to do that, can we then select for that trait and make tremendous progress?
And some long-term implications,
Absolutely.
It sounds like.
Absolutely. I don't think we've made much progress in cow efficiency if you sell your calves at weaning. This is a way where we could, get to that end of trying to reduce intake, you could reduce stocking area to run more animals on the same amount of property and so on if they're more efficient.
Okay, well, keep us posted on what your findings are, and we'll check back with you when you have more to tell us.
Will do. Thank you for coming.
Okay, Dave Lalman, our Extension Beef Cattle Specialist.